This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
One of the most common emails I get from listeners is around how to fight against all of the roadblocks and barriers to innovation. In this week's show, I'm going to address what are the 5 of the biggest barriers to innovation. Now, how do I come up with this list of 5? I didn't come up with it. This is actually coming from a study put out by Innovation Leader in partnership with KPMG. And they surveyed chief innovation officers from large companies all the way down to small companies. But I can tell you that the ones that they chose are ones that resonate with the constant questions I get. So we're going to walk through each of these 5, and then I'm going to share with you my thoughts on each one and what I would do to get around each of those barriers. So what are the 5 barriers? Let me give those to you up front, and we'll cover those throughout the show. First is politics, turf wars, no alignment. 55% of all innovation leaders within organizations define that as being the number one barrier to innovation. Number 2 at 45% is cultural issues. At number 3, 41% at inability to act on signals. Number 4 at 40% is lack of budget. And number 5 at 35% is lack of strategy, lack of vision. So, let's walk through all of these. Again, I'll share with you my thoughts on each one and what I would do within my organization or in my previous roles to get around those. Now, some of this may not apply to you. Things I'm going to suggest just won't work in your organization. That's fine. Just use it as an input as you think through how do you get around all of the speed bumps, the friction, the sands in the gears that prevent you, your team, your organization from being successful at innovation. So number 1, politics, turf wars, no alignment. Now, this tends to get manifested highly by the fact of who gets credit. Who is going to get credit for the innovation? Also, the term politics, you could also manifest that to mean the innovation antibodies. These are the people within your organization who are telling you, oh, that'll never work, or I've tried that before, or I'm the expert, let me do the thinking, you just do the doing, all kinds of manifestations. And politics is a big challenge, particularly in large organizations. As you get higher in the organization, people spend more time defending their position. They maybe took risks earlier in their career, but once they achieve a certain level of success, they tend to go into defense mode, and they don't want anything to risk that position. So you'll fight a lot of politics. The other is turf. Turf is, for instance, one of the most common manifestations of turf in the innovation game is if you have a team within your organization that is, quote, the innovation team. So let's say I'm a general manager in a product group, and the CEO appoints a chief innovation officer, and that chief innovation officer builds an innovation team, right? And all of a sudden, the innovation team's coming up with products that fit into my product group. This manifests itself in that innovation team trying to pass off their innovation to me as a product GM. And I'm going to be very resistant, right? One is the new product ideas should have been coming from my team. You're making me look bad. You didn't include me in that innovation effort. And then the innovation team is sitting there going, hold on, I created this great innovation and I can't get anybody else in the receiving organization to take it. It's their problem. It's their fault. And I'll talk a little bit about some ways to get around that. And then the other part of this is no alignment. The fact that everybody's off kind of going in 500 different directions. This manifests itself when you've got a leader who says, hurry up, we need innovations. And that is the end of the leadership guidance that you get. And everybody just kind of scatters in all directions, thinking that they're doing the right thing, but there's no alignment with the activities. There's no alignment with the overall organizational vision. All you have is, literally hundreds, if not thousands of people all thinking they're doing the right thing, but missing out on that opportunity to leverage. So again, 55% in this study identify politics, turf wars, no alignment as the number one barrier to innovation. So politics, who gets credit? I'm a big believer that if you're part of an innovation team, do not worry about the credit. It is not about, you getting your name attached to it. It's about the impact to the organization. And if you have good leadership within your organization, they'll know where that idea came from. They'll know where that comes from. The other piece is I would actually encourage you in your organizations not to use the word innovation in a team name or in a job title. I've had this happen at HP when I was CTO at HP. In my infamous wisdom, and look, I'm an innovation guy. I've been doing this 25 years. I created a team called the Innovation Program Office, or IPO. Soon as you put the name innovation in that, you paint a target on that team, right? Innovation should not be the only realm of a single team, but should be permeated throughout the organization. You need the entire organization, the entire creativity of all of your team members to be contributing. And as soon as you identify somebody as innovation, what the other teams feel like you're saying is that you are not innovation. So be very, very careful. It'll solve a lot of your politics issues if you just stay away from naming a group, a team name, or even giving a job title out that has the word innovation in it. Innovation's not a role. Innovation is a skill. Innovation is a capability within your organization, and it should be something that permeates your entire organization. On the turf battle piece, what I ran into this in spades at HP, right, where the Innovation Program Office would be working on some products. We would try to pass it off to the product groups, and it would be an absolute no-go. Do not pass start, do not collect $200. And the end result was a lot of frustration on both sides. What we ended up doing is we would actually then transform the IPO to be more of a funding source. So the problem with the product groups is there was never enough funding for really great product ideas. So if someone within our product group came up with an idea and their product group did not have the funding to support it, IPO would, quote, sponsor that project. We would put some extra resources in play. But the most important thing is we would fund it. We would actually give money to that manager and to that team to go off and innovate. And that was transformative in changing this challenge about turf wars. And then no alignment. No alignment is really a sign of no leadership. You need strong leadership when it comes to innovation in order for you to have any shot of having a success or impact. So if there's lack of alignment, that means there's typically lack of direction, there's lack of understanding, there's lack of mission being communicated to the organization around innovation. And you end up with everybody kind of going, 25 different directions, and you miss out on the opportunity to get leverage. If you have clear alignment and you have alignment on a target and you have strong leadership around innovation, then you get that leverage effect. You get the focus effect. As we talked about literally hundreds of times in this show over the 14 years, you have to have focus. Focus up front actually drives increased improvement of ideas, increases just the sheer number of ideas, and I've seen the direct correlation to actually improved innovation coming out the other end. So alignment is absolutely critical. So again, politics, turf wars, no alignment. 55% in this study identified it as the number one barrier. And my guess is that you have experienced this exact problem. So again, think about it from don't focus on who gets credit. Be careful of naming people to innovation teams or calling teams innovation teams. On the turf, find a way to integrate all of the organizations. Think of your organization as an ecosystem and bring that ecosystem together around the innovation efforts that you're working on. And then the no alignment is about focus. Look at the focus and how you define the areas that you're going to go into and what is it you're going to do, because then you get maximum leverage. And if you can solve maybe not all three, but a couple of these, it makes life orders of magnitude easier to get innovation success through your team, through your organization, and ultimately have impact in the marketplace. So again, in the study from innovation leaders and KPMG, 55% of all leaders identified politics, turf wars, no alignment as the number one barrier to innovation. And in the show notes, I'll have links to more about politics, turf, and no alignment, and point you to some past shows that will actually dive into more details and give you more context and tools to use. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back after this quick break. Welcome back. Let's continue our conversation on the 5 of the biggest barriers to innovation. In the last segment, we covered politics, turf wars, and no alignment. What we're going to talk about now is about culture. Culture came up as the number 2 barrier to innovation in this study from Innovation Leader with KPMG. So cultural issues. Cultural issues actually play, probably I think, should have been number 1, but that's just in my experience. Why is culture so important? Particularly in established organizations, cultures get locked in, they're pretty well defined. But there's a couple of underlying issues around culture that I've seen within organizations. One is this fear of failure. How does your organization deal with failure? If someone tries something and it fails and all of a sudden they get booted out of the organization, what signal does that send to the rest of the organization that they should go take some risk and go try something? The other is a willingness to experiment. Will you even have an opportunity to pitch senior leaders and get support and maybe a little bit of money and free up a little time in your schedule in order to go experiment and try something new? While a lot of leaders will say innovation is important and innovation has somewhat become a buzzword in the marketplace today, this becomes the challenge of, does the culture support trying and failing? Because if you are really pushing the envelope on innovation, you need to be very comfortable with an 80 to 90% failure rate. And let me tell you from experiences, CEOs do not typically have the fortitude to watch and encourage 90% failures. That's not how they got to the position they're in. They had some successes in their career, and that catapulted them into the role they're in. So all of a sudden you're saying, no, you need to be comfortable with a very high failure rate. Most leaders do not have the fortitude. And in fact, what I've done, and I've talked about this in a show, and I'll go back and find it, and I'll link it into the show notes, around going stealth. Go dark, go deep. Don't stand up and shout about your projects, because then you're just painting a target. One of the things to get around the culture is, in some cases, do it behind the curtain. Don't be out there talking about it. Go stealth. Find a way to do the experiment to where you're not in the spotlight within your organization. Now, how do you fix culture on a long-term basis? Well, stealth is one way to do it, but you're really not fixing it. You're working around the culture. The way to fix the culture is to get the leadership to identify what core values do you need to have in your organization to encourage innovation. What are the core values? One is this the core value of experimentation. Go try things. Try them out. Don't do the same thing the same way for an extended period of time. Be willing to change. And there's a previous show I talked about on core values that encourage innovation. I'll put a link into that. The other is if you identify the core values that you want your organization to be focused on to support innovation, put them in every person's performance review. It's one of those things where you can go talk about it. You can print them on a poster. You can hang them on the wall. You can talk about it in an all-hands meeting. But unless you're going to reward people for acting in the right way, they will tend to roll back to the way that they've always operated. So I encourage identifying those core values that are fundamental to your organization being successful, and then putting them in performance reviews. Measure people and encourage and reward people who actually show and live those core values and live the focus on innovation, or Put corrective action in for people to encourage them, help the others change to adapt to the new core values and to what you're trying to do within the organization. If you don't put a measurement about it, people don't do it. The second one I want to talk about here real quickly is the inability to act on signals. The inability to act on signals. And this typically falls into lack of flexibility within an organization. You see a new opportunity or you see a risk on the horizon that's going to impact your organization. How do you react? Well, if you are fully committed your budget, you have fully committed your headcount, and you have no flexibility to start a project, guess what? You're waiting for the budget cycle to get something approved. And that could be 6-9 months from now, and you're basically not able to get started. The other is do you have a mechanism to identify weak signals? Weak signals are those things that, are just starting to show themselves. Think of them as kind of a canary in the coal mine type of thing that's giving you a hint that there's a fundamental change coming across the horizon. Lots of organizations will dispel those weak signals because they can rationalize them away. If you want 2 examples, Kodak and Nokia. Kodak, oh no, we tried digital pictures, the quality is not good enough. Film will always be the premier means of taking photographs. And I don't know about you, I still have my film camera here in my studio. I haven't shot a picture on it in probably 7 or 8 years. Nokia, the same thing. Phones, oh no, we're the king of the hill. Yeah, there's this thing going on around different kinds of form factors and applications on phones, but that's for what PCs are for. Phones are phones. And look what happened to them. So the key here is on the weak signals is 1, being able to identify them, 2, have a willingness to change, 3, have the flexibility to change. And on the flexibility, I actually encourage organizations not to redline their headcount spend and not to redline their budget. Don't commit 100% of your budget at the beginning of the year to all the existing projects, and don't commit your available headcount so that you could hire or bring in consultants and you have dollars to spend against a project when you need to make that change. And so also with signals is, I'm going to guess there's people within your organization who are pretty good at identifying the weak signals. Find them, right? These are the people who maybe have been written off by management before because they're always, raising the flag, and some people may refer to them as crying wolf. Listen to them, find them. And the other is also resist your organization from hogging information. Everybody needs all of the information available to them in order to identify these weak signals. So again, this half, we talked about the cultural issues. 45% leaders identify cultural issues as a significant barrier. In fact, the number 2 barrier to innovation. And then the number 3, at 41% of all leaders, the inability to act on signals. So far we've covered politics, turf wars, no alignment as number 1 at 55. We've talked about the cultural issues, which is 45% of the barriers. 45% of the executives think it's a barrier. And then the inability to act on signals at 41. We've got 2 more to talk through to get through the 5 of the biggest barriers to innovation. We're going to continue this conversation. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back after this quick break. Welcome back as we continue our conversations of the 5 of the biggest barriers to innovation. Now, this list came from a survey from Innovation Leader with KPMG. And this is the 2018 survey. They've actually been doing this survey for quite a while. And there's actually a lot of innovation surveys that are being put out in the last handful of years. So this one just happened to be convenient. It's one that I've been looking at here recently. But this is really addressing the questions I get from you when you drop me an email about the barriers or struggles or frustrations or asking for advice on how to, maybe deal with a problem boss. So hopefully what you're getting from me today really is how I would respond or deal with these barriers to innovation. So we've already covered the first 3. Let's get through the last 2. Number 4, at 40% of all executives identifying this as one of the top 5 barriers to innovation, is lack of budget. Now, I talked a little bit about this in the last segment about signals. The budget is a real challenge for innovation because the budget cycle in most organizations is annual. Some organizations, and it would drive me absolutely bananas, is if they had to do quarterly budgets. The fact is innovation does not happen on an annual cycle. In an annual budgeting process, you tend to get the funding, and then as you get towards the end of the year, you then end up scrambling to justify why you should have money for the next year. The innovation team somewhat slows down because they're not quite sure. They don't want to commit maybe dollars to something if they're not sure they're going to have the budget for next year. So you end up with this kind of energy level, beginning of the year, really high. As you get later in the year, there's this dip in the energy level until you get through the annual budgeting process, and then you're back up again. And it causes kind of this start-stop feel to the innovation programs within the organization. We've been experimenting with doing what we called trended spending. So we look at innovation teams and we look at projects and we look at historical spend, and we look to give as much confidence to the teams that trended spending is not going to vary, and giving leaders enough flexibility as projects are winding down that actually frees up dollars for them to put onto other projects. So budget is one of those annoyances. It's an artifact of corporate structure, particularly if you're a public company and you got to do quarterly results and end of year results, that does not really align or is supportive of the innovation effort. In addition to that, you run into what I call the rule of 18, and I've done multiple shows and there's multiple blog posts over at philmckinney.com on this. And actually, I wrote an article for Forbes, so you can go out to Forbes and just search for me, and I did a number of articles for them a number of years ago on innovation. But Rule of 18 says that I can get any executive interested in a project mid-year. They'll scrape together some dollars to get the project started. As we go into the first budget cycle, the executives are still all excited. They write it into the budget. At that end of that next year, where I'm going into the second budget cycle, what I have found is that any innovation project has not shown impact, the risk of it being canceled is extremely high. So the rule of 18, it's about the length of time any senior leader is willing to commit to a project before they expect to see some form of impact. My advice to innovation teams is to chunk down your projects to show impact and deliverables on kind of an every 18-month cycle, so that kind of reignites and gets the enthusiasm level and the support back up in order to make it through the next budget cycles. One thing that I would advise organizations to think about is some form of multi-year commitment, right? Bill Hewlett and David Packard had this saying inside of HP is a true leader, takes on and does the hard things when signals are telling you to do otherwise. So whether it's, economic crises, bad execution within the organization, innovation and R&D tend to be the projects that get cut. Why? Because it's the most visible and it's the easiest to pull back from. Real leaders, though, stick to it. And what you find when you look at companies that had disproportionate success past some form of an economic crisis are those that continue to invest through the crises. So my advice when I talk to CEOs or chief innovation officers is make the multi-year commitment. Stick with it. Make sure you've got alignment from your board of directors through your CEO. If you are a CEO, this ball falls in your lap, right? Stick with it in order to ensure that the teams can continue to invest. And it's that investment, even through the tough times, that will show spades on the other side. And then the other piece is, and this is kind of a unique byproduct, right, of the way we do incentive payments and bonuses across organizations. If you give people an incentive to say, you're going to you have this kind of budget, and you need to achieve these results. Leaders sometimes will play the game where they'll underspend the budget because they feel like the budget is the metric that they're going to get measured. So if they show an overspend, that's, oh my gosh, that's horrible. If I show an underspend, that's great because it shows that I'm pretty efficient. I'm very efficient. I actually flip that in my incentive structures with my leaders is that if you underspend, we will have a hard conversation. Because underspending means that you're not investing. I'd much rather have the money invested in a project than sitting in the bank account collecting, whatever interest rate we could get, by having cash sitting in the checking account, right? If you underspend, that's where I will have a hard conversation with leaders, because that is putting the organization at risk. Innovations is an engine that you've got to continuously feed, and you cannot play this game. And the last of the 5 of the biggest barriers to innovation is lack of strategy, lack of vision. This is one that I hear all the time. A lot of really long-term established organizations kind of turn into an engine that just keeps chugging down the same road they've been on forever and ever. And innovation strategy or innovation vision is not incorporated into the overall vision of the organization. CEOs will stand up, or public companies will put out their quarterly reports and they'll use the word innovation, but they don't explain how innovation is core, or how innovation is going to be integrated into the strategy, or where the target focus of innovation is, whether it's new markets or whether it's new products and technologies, whether you're going to serve existing customers with new products, or are you going to go into entirely new customers, new technologies, new product areas? There's no vision. It's like, here's a bunch of dollars. We're going to do innovation, and we'll come back in 3 years and tell you what it is. And that is more of a, what I would call accidental innovation. And that is not for long-term success. You need to commit the time to define an innovation strategy and an innovation vision. It's hard. It's hard to think about how do you integrate that in. Look, strategy and vision are hard in organizations overall. Now try to bring innovation into it. That is an order of magnitude. If you're not familiar with how to do that, or you're struggling on helping your leaders understand that importance, there's a lot of really good materials out there. You can always drop me an email and I'll point you to some resources. But this is one that you just absolutely have to get right, and your leaders have to be aligned. So let's refresh. 5 of the biggest barriers to innovation. Number 1 at 55%, political, turf wars, no alignment. Number 2 at 45% is cultural issues. Number 3 at 41%, the inability to act on signals. At 40%, lack of budget. And number 5 at 35%, lack of strategy, lack of vision. So hopefully you found this useful. Again, if you've got a specific example or struggling with a specific issue, drop me an email at phil@killerinnovations.com and I'll get right back to you. Or better yet, join us over at theinnovators.community. That's a private Slack community that is full of leading innovators from around the world. And people can post questions. You can reach out as a direct message also if you want to keep it private, and get advice from leading innovators from around the world. So check that out, theinnovators.community. Don't go anywhere. In the next segment, we will have another 5 minutes to new ideas. This is designed to ask and challenge you with questions to spark new ideas for your company, your product, or your service. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break. This segment of the show I call 5 Minutes to New Ideas, designed for the creative mind looking for that next great idea. Each episode will challenge you to think differently about yourself and your business by asking unique, funny, and sometimes crazy questions. Get your notebook out and be ready to uncover that game-changing idea. Here is 5 Minutes to New Ideas. Do you have a digital twin? The concept first formed on consumer sites like Yelp, but it's becoming a catchphrase in marketing and sales. The idea is that dedicated users of sites like Yelp eventually notice that there are other users whose taste, interest, and favorites match their own. These digital twins do not know each other in the traditional way. They most likely never communicate directly with each other, but a link forms as one person realizes that the other seems to like or dislike the same brands that he or she does. Both twins' tastes align across a number of sites. People start to trust these twins to the point where they bypass the process of reading multiple reviews and simply check to see what their twin thinks. Eventually, people start to value their digital twins' opinions over their own. Recently, I was looking for a barber, since my previous one made the inconvenient decision to retire. I went on Yelp and found a local husband and wife shop that had more than 100 5-star reviews. I showed up one Saturday for a cut. Sure enough, the line was out the door, but the service was great. Now, I've never met any of these reviewers, but my instinct was to trust the collective voice of the group. This is a huge change from the old days when I have gone into work and asked my buddies in the office for a recommendation. The power of the anonymous point of view has been amplified, and it's incredibly hard to control. Customers used to be much more influenced by sales guys and making the big purchases, but now an individual can walk into a store already sold on what brand item they want, and even if an item has no real experience with or knowledge about. So what's the end result? There's been a huge swing in influence. The individual voices of happy or dissatisfied customers has been amplified, way beyond the power of an individual voice in the pre-internet era. Brands have lost some of that control, and advertising or sales reps are losing their ability to influence the sale. This is a huge shift from how people used to be swayed in making their buying decisions. Customers are relying on sites like Yelp, Digital Twins, and other forum sites because they want to reduce bias in their purchasing decisions. We are all savvy to the way advertising or paid product placements can influence us to buy things that might not be right for us. We weigh our purchasing decisions more heavily towards those anonymous voices because we think that doing so will help us to make better decisions. We want our decisions to be less about who had the best advertising campaign and more about who has the best product. Granted, most users are sophisticated enough to understand how these review sites work. A small number of highly positive reviews are a less accurate reflection of the actual experience of buying from the store than the large number of mixed reviews. Once you get north of 50 or 100 reviews, the sheer volume of reviews makes it harder to game the system. Users know that they can throw out the extreme reviews, the ones that are really high scores and those that are really low scores. The very low and very high scores are more likely biased and can cancel each other out. Once these extremes are gone, you are left with a more meaningful and somewhat less corruptible medium review. The key elements of using digital twins is to find that one person who is so central to a network that they sway the opinions of others. Or perhaps, more interestingly, explore how you can replicate the experience of a digital twin in a more controllable, less organic state. How can you give your users the feeling that your product is approved of and supported by someone whose taste is trusted by the crowd? Digital twins are the next logical progression from using celebrities to promote products. These anonymous voices can become highly targetable and very localized micro-celebrities who have a sense of authenticity that comes from the social media they use. So how will you use them to your advantage? Ask yourself the questions. What is the process used by my customer to discover my product? That's a hard question. What is the process used by my customer to discover my product? Do you really understand what is influencing your customers today? And don't stop there. Dig deeper by asking, how are your customers influenced to buy your product? What are the influences that they're focused on that influence that decision? And how will your customers discover and select your product in 5 years? If you try to fix it for today, you're going to miss the window of opportunity. Where are your customers going? How will they be influenced? And how could you get your customer to buy your product if you stop paying commissions or buying advertising? This question really is focused on you throwing out that typical dependency of commission and advertising. If the salespeople and advertising have less influence, you better start thinking about how you're going to get your customers to buy your product with no commission and no advertising. Now, challenge yourselves to think differently. Challenge the assumptions of how customers will buy your product in the future. I'm Phil McKinney, and thanks for listening. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join in. If you have any comments or suggestions, drop me a note over at phil@killerinnovations.com. Now, the reason I've been doing this show since 2005 is to pay back my early mentor by paying it forward. My first mentor, Bob Davis, invested an immense amount of time in training and coaching me, which had a major impact on my career. When I went back and asked him how I could pay him back, he just laughed and said I couldn't. I had to pay it forward. If I could ask for a favor, could you help me pay it forward? How? 1, give us a rating wherever you get your podcast, as that helps spread the word. And 2, by telling others about the show. This episode of Killer Innovations was produced by the Innovators Network. You can find the show notes and the entire show catalog over at killerinnovations.com. I'll talk to you next week. In the meantime, go out and change the world with your killer innovation. Bye-bye.